Assalamu alaikum everyone, and welcome to the fourth episode in a 5-part series on communication in marriage. So let's be honest with ourselves. Healthy communication, no matter who it's with, is hard. It's difficult. It's not easy. It's something that has to be learned, and it's something that takes a lot of time to get right. And you'll never 100% be great at it, but you can be really good at it. But one thing's for sure is that not all communication difficulties are equal. Meaning for some people, communication is much more difficult than it is for others. You might find yourself in that situation where you find that communicating is just something that's hard. You've read the books, you've read the articles, you've watched the videos, you've listened to the podcast, and it's just so incredibly difficult for you to implement what you're learning. This is the part where we step back and we have to recognize that there are many different things outside of just our capacity to build skills and techniques that we learn and activities that we do that affect our ability to communicate in a healthy manner. Those things are what this episode is going to be about today. So let's start at the very beginning. Our past and the communication that we saw modeled for us is going to be such a huge part of the way that we communicate in the future. And it can be a huge reason why healthy communication is difficult for us in the present. So, for example, if you saw, let's say your parents, having healthy conflict, when they were arguing about something, they were very mindful of how they went about that in front of you. They didn't raise their voice at each other. They didn't name call. They were very mindful of maintaining respect. If things were getting heated, maybe they decided to take it to a private area so they didn't get heated in front of you. They were just very intentional about how they had conflict in front of you. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean that healthy communication is just going to be second nature to you, but it does mean that it's going to be a lot easier for you. On the other hand, the counterpart is that what if your parents demonstrated very unhealthy communication patterns? They raised their voice. They were very disrespectful to each other. It was very chaotic and explosive and aggressive whenever they had conflict. Maybe it was just the baseline of how they communicated to each other was just always insulting and condescending, and you constantly notice that. That is now the example that you're seeing and you're learning is how people communicate when they're married. So that's going to affect you in the long run, unless you're very intentional about countering that. On the other hand, to that same issue, it might not even be that you use those same techniques in your relationship, but let's say that when that conflict was happening, you started to feel very anxious. It made you want to run away. It made you want to hide. You didn't like it. It made you feel icky. It might be that now, because of that same experience, when you were a kid and you were developing this understanding of how to communicate, and this is where we learn many of the things that we end up doing later in life. We learn it in childhood. We're supposed to have healthy options modeled for us in childhood. Sometimes we don't, and then it becomes a part of our daily life until we do the work to undo it. But if you're in that situation where conflict always made you super anxious, now let's say you're married and a conflict arises, instead of being willing to attack it head on, you might find yourself running away or shutting down or stonewalling or doing everything you can to avoid solving a conflict. And that's not healthy either, obviously, because certain conflicts need to be dealt with. Things don't just go away because we sweep them under the rug and we pretend like we can't see them. Obviously, and a part of being a healthy, mature partner is recognizing that certain conflict needs to be addressed. So that is one very important thing to think about. Did you have healthy examples of conflict management or communication in your childhood? And if you didn't, then what did that do to you? How did that affect the way you communicate? And how did that affect the way you deal with conflict? When you start unpacking that, it's going to be a lot easier to start actually working through utilizing those techniques and recognizing which one of those are very emotionally triggering for you and which ones are a lot easier to adapt to. Another thing that I will mention, which is more so a modern day issue when it comes to communication, is social media. Social media really has done a lot of harm to the way that we perceive healthy marriages. Why? Because people will post the best moments of their marriages online. They'll post the most pretty pictures and the best Instagram reels and the greatest Facebook photos. And you, as someone who's maybe not recognizing that this is not reality, is seeing them and you're scanning through. And maybe you start to feel jealous, or maybe you start to feel, well, why doesn't my partner or why doesn't my spouse do this for me? it can really affect the way you communicate, because it can cause some resentment, or can cause some jealousy, or can cause some lack of appreciation for your partner, because again, you're not looking at the things that your partner does do for you. You're looking at what they're not doing for you based on this altered version of reality that you're seeing on social media. And then because of that, communication starts to break down, because you maybe an undertone of lacking appreciation are actually causing harm to your partner through your communication. Maybe you're giving the cold shoulder, or you're not as expressive as you should be in terms of loving words and affirmation. So that's something to think about too. And if you find that that's an issue for you, maybe it's time to take a fast from social media, or to unfollow certain accounts that make you feel that way, or to ensure that, when you do see these, you're having that moment of cognition with yourself, saying, this isn't reality, and I appreciate my relationship for what it is. Assalamu alaikum, guys. I hope this was super helpful to you, and I hope to see you in the next video. Assalamu alaikum.